The wind was cold on the mining colony of Varric 7. The air always smelled like metal and smoke. Humans lived in small shelters, barely warm, surrounded by walls of steel. Jack, a human engineer, stepped out of the supply center, a ration pack. In his hand, his breath came out like smoke in the frozen air. He didn't see her at first, just a shadow moving fast. Then bump, a sharp push, and the ration pack was gone. Jack spun around, and his eyes caught a figure in a torn cloak darting into an alley. "Hey!" he shouted, running after the thief, boots hitting metal. He chased her through narrow walkways and broken vents. The colony lights flickered above, and steam rose from pipes, hiding everything in mist. The figure was quick, jumping over barrels and ducking under a broken fence. But Jack had been in this colony for years. He knew every shortcut. Every turn, he sprinted to a side path and cut her off. The cloaked figure froze, then tried to turn back, but Jack grabbed her arm. She struggled, weakly, her cloak falling off her shoulder, and then she collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "My child?" "She's hungry." Jack paused, eyes narrowing. The figure was not human. Her skin was pale violet, marked with small glowing spots. She had ridges along her forehead and long fingers. Trembling from the cold, from behind a rusted crate, something moved. A pair of small, scared eyes peeked out at a child, even smaller than human children, shivering and clutching a thin cloth. Her stomach growled so loud it hurt to hear. Jack stepped back, confused. This wasn't just some petty thief. It was a mother, and her child looked like she hadn't eaten in days. "Why didn't you ask for help?" Jack said, but his voice came out soft, not angry. The woman looked down, ashamed. "We're not allowed," she said. "Your kind humans chase us away." Jack knew it was true. The colony had rules. Aliens like her weren't permitted to live in the human zones. They were pushed to the outskirts, in broken shelters, given nothing. The child stepped out slowly, eyes wide with fear. She held onto her mother's leg, too scared to speak. Jack's heart ached as he looked at them. He thought about walking away, about calling security, but something in him said no. Jack knelt down, pulled the ration pack from his coat. He handed it to the child, who grabbed it like treasure. She tore it open and began eating quickly. Tears ran down her cheeks, not from pain but from relief. The mother looked at Jack, surprised. "You're not turning us in?" she asked. Jack shook his head. "I'm not heartless," he said. "Come with me. You can't survive out here." The woman hesitated, but then nodded. She picked up her child and followed Jack. They moved through side streets, avoiding patrol bots and cameras. Jack kept looking over his shoulder. Helping them meant trouble, but he didn't care. He brought them to a small metal shack, hidden behind fuel tanks. Inside, it was warm enough to live, with a heater, a bed, and a little light. "Stay here for now," Jack said. "You'll be safe." The woman sat down slowly, her arms wrapped around the child. Jack gave her a blanket and a cup of water. She looked at him for a long time before speaking again. "My name is Sarai," she said. Jack nodded. "I'm Jack." He didn't ask more. Not yet. The child had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, safe for the first time in who knows how long. Jack leaned against the wall, his thoughts racing. This wasn't part of his plan. He lived alone, kept to himself, but now, in this cold world, he had taken in an alien thief and her starving child. Something had changed, and he wasn't sure why, but he didn't regret it. Outside, the wind howled. Patrol drones floated above the rooftops, scanning for trouble, but in Jack's little shelter, a mother and daughter had found a moment of peace, and it all started with a stolen ration pack. Jack locked the door behind him and turned to see Sarai sitting quietly in the corner, her daughter curled up beside her, asleep again. the empty ration pack clutched in tiny fingers like it was gold. The little heater hummed softly, throwing out just enough warmth to chase the cold from the air. Jack wasn't sure what to say. He'd only meant to help for a moment, but now they were in his space. Real and fragile, and he couldn't send them back into the dark. Sarai's eyes followed every movement Jack made. She looked tired but alert, like someone who had spent too long waiting for danger. Her body was thin. Not from beauty, but from hunger and fear. She finally spoke, her voice a whisper. "Thank you. I didn't know humans still had kindness." Jack shrugged, not looking at her. "Most don't." "Not anymore." He opened a small cabinet and took out a second ration bar. Half melted but still edible, he handed it to Sarai, who hesitated, then took it and broke it in half, giving the larger piece to her daughter. Jack watched, surprised. Even with so little, she still gave more to her child. The girl stirred, woke up slowly, and took the food with a sleepy smile. For a second, everything was quiet, almost peaceful. But then came the sound of distant engines, low and mechanical. Jack froze, listening. He knew that sound colony patrol units. Doing their rounds, he moved fast, turning off the heater, darkening the lights. "Stay quiet," he said, peeking. Through the small window slit, Sarai pulled the blanket over herself and the child. Her eyes wide and alert. The patrol car passed by slowly, its scanner light sweeping the alleys. It didn't stop, but it was close enough to feel like a warning. When the sound faded, Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Sarai looked at him, her voice calm but serious. "If they catch me, they'll separate me from her." Jack didn't answer right away. He didn't know what the laws were exactly. But he knew enough to understand Dalians like Sarai had no rights here. They were undocumented, unwanted, invisible, until seen and punished if caught. "You'll need to stay hidden," Jack finally said. "At least for now." Sarai nodded. "Slowly, I can work, clean, fix things. I'm not useless." Jack believed her. Her hands were calloused, her eyes sharp. This was not someone who sat and waited for help. She was a survivor. Later that night, Jack cleared out the crawlspace beneath his bed. It was dusty and narrow, but better than nothing. He laid down a thin mattress, some blankets, and a canteen of water. "Hide here if they come," he told her. Sarai didn't ask questions. She just nodded and helped make it ready. When the girl was asleep again, Jack sat by the small table. Sipping water, Sarai joined him. Her arms wrapped around herself. After a long silence, she said, "My people weren't always like this." Jack glanced at her, waiting. She continued, "We had homes once, planets of our own. But then came the raids, the trade wars. Everything was taken, even our names." Jack had heard stories: alien refugees, broken fleets, families scattered across systems, but hearing it from her, so close, made it different. She wasn't a headline or a report, she was real. And her pain was fresh. "My mate tried to protect us," she said quietly. "He was killed during a supply riot." Jack didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. Sarai's eyes glistened in the low light, but she didn't cry. She had cried enough already. Outside, the night deepened, the wind scratching at the walls like claws. Inside, 3 lives breathed in silence: one human, one alien mother, and one sleeping child. Jack never planned for this. He was just a lonely man in a forgotten colony. But now, everything was different. He looked at the small girl, her chest rising and falling peacefully. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear: he couldn't let her starve. Not while he was still breathing. And just like that, without words or promises, a human shelter had become something more. A hiding place, a second chance, a quiet rebellion against a world that had stopped caring. The days passed slowly, but not peacefully. Jack worked during the day at the outer reactor grid, fixing power cables and worn-out joints. Every time he returned home, his eyes scanned the alley for patrols, for neighbors watching, but no one seemed to notice or care. Maybe that was the one gift this broken colony had to offer. Inside the shelter, things were changing. The little girl, whose name was Lena, had stopped hiding every time Jack entered. Now, when he came back, she peeked from behind the curtain with big, curious eyes. She still didn't talk much, but her silence didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like waiting. Sarai cleaned the small shelter while Jack was gone. She fixed the water line that leaked near the corner. Using spare metal pieces and her own hands, Jack noticed how her fingers moved with skill, how she shaped things without tools. When he asked her about it, she just smiled faintly. "My people were builders before we became beggars." One night, Jack returned early and found Sarai sitting by the heater with Lena in her lap. She was humming something soft in her language, a melody that didn't need words to be beautiful. Lena was asleep, and for a moment, Sarai looked at peace. Jack didn't interrupt. He stood quietly, watching them in the soft light. He hadn't seen something so gentle in years. Later, Sarai thanked him again, not for the food or the warmth but for not being afraid of her. Jack said nothing, just nodded, but deep inside, something had started to shift. He had always kept to himself, always believed it was easier that way. Now, he wasn't so sure. That same night, while checking the heater core, Jack noticed something odd. A red light blinking slowly on the wall. One of his hidden motion sensors had been triggered. He froze, heart pounding, then crawled to the corner of the room and opened the control box. Someone had passed by the rear alley not long ago. Just outside his window, not just once, twice. Within the same hour, Jack didn't say anything to Sarai yet, but he moved the emergency exit plan closer to the bed. He packed a small bag with water, energy bars, and a thermal blanket, just in case. The next day, Jack left for work as usual. But his mind was heavy. He kept thinking about the way Lena had smiled the night before, her tiny hands clapping as she played with his flashlight. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was healing. And that made the danger even worse. If they were found now, the fall would be too deep. When he returned home, Sarai was quiet, her face pale. She showed him a bruise on her arm, fresh and purple. "I went out during the day," she whispered. "Just for a moment, I needed more thread to patch the blanket." Jack felt heat rise in his chest, not from anger at her, but at the world that forced her to choose between warmth and safety. "Did anyone see you?" he asked sharply. Sarai shook her head, but her hands trembled. Jack looked at the bruise again, then at Lena, who sat quietly in the corner, hugging a cloth doll Sarai had made from old rags. He knew it now. They couldn't stay here much longer, not if they wanted to survive that night while Sarai and Lena slept. Jack sat alone with the lights off, staring at the cold metal floor. He used to think survival meant shutting people out, staying invisible, but now 2 aliens were living in his space, warming his home with their presence, and he didn't want to go back to being alone. Somewhere deep inside, a question formed. What kind of man lets a child starve just because? The law says not human. Jack clenched his fist, the answer already written in his heartbeat. Not him, not anymore. And outside, hidden in the shadow of the fuel tanks, someone watched the shelter with unblinking eyes. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark, listening to every sound outside. Each distant clank of metal made his shoulders tense. Each gust of wind made him glance at the door. Sarai and Lena slept on the small mattress, unaware of the growing shadow creeping toward their quiet refuge. By morning, Jack's eyes were red, but his hands were steady. He checked his tools, rewired the motion sensor, and added a silent alarm to the door. He didn't speak much as he ate a dry protein bar. Sarai noticed, but said nothing. She only placed a warm cup beside him, made from some plant-based mix she had created using scraps from Jack's supplies. Later that day, when Jack returned from his shift, the door to his shelter was slightly open. His heart dropped. He pushed it slowly, his other hand ready on the wrench he always carried. Inside, everything looked untouched but too quiet. Then he heard movement beneath the bed. He crouched and whispered, "It's me." Sarai peeked out, her face pale with fear. "They came," she whispered to officers. "They knocked, they asked questions, they walked around outside, but didn't come in." Jack let out a shaky breath. "They'll be back," he muttered. "They always come back." He sat down heavily, rubbing his forehead. They had been lucky this time, but luck never lasts long in colonies like this. The system always finds a way to crush anything it doesn't control. That evening, someone knocked again, but it wasn't an officer. It was old Mira, the neighbor, who lived 2 shelters away. She looked at Jack with a half-smile, holding a tin can. "Thought you might want some real food," she said. "I had leftovers." Jack thanked her and took the can. But as she turned to leave, she paused. "I saw movement by your back fence yesterday," she said without looking at him. "Strange shape, small. Not human." Jack's stomach twisted. He nodded slowly, trying to stay calm. Myra looked over her shoulder, her eyes sharp. "I don't care what's happening in here, Jack," she said quietly. "I just hope you know what you're doing." Then she walked away, her steps echoing through the alley. Jack stood frozen for a long time, holding the warm tin that suddenly felt heavy in his hands. When he stepped back inside, Sarai was watching him. "She must have heard everything. They know," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," Jack replied, "but soon." He walked to the workbench and pulled out a dusty map from an old drawer. He unrolled it on the table and pointed at a faded red line near the edge. "This tunnel here, it's an old maintenance route," he said, "leads out beyond the colony wall." Sarai moved closer, her hand resting lightly on the table. "Is it safe?" Jack gave a small smile, the first in days. "Nothing's safe," he said. "But it's better than waiting for a knock that never goes away." They stayed up late that night, making a plan. Sarai packed the food. Jack checked the tunnel schematics. Lena watched them with wide eyes, not fully understanding, but sensing the change. The next morning, the sky over Varric 7 turned a strange yellow. A storm warning blinking across public terminals. Jack used the alert to his advantage. Less patrols, more distractions. They would leave at dusk. When the winds were loud enough to cover their escape, he gave Sarai an old jacket, torn but warm. For Lena, he wrapped a scarf around her neck, her small face almost disappearing inside it. She smiled and whispered her first human word to him. Soft and innocent. Warm, Jack felt something crack inside his chest. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was something worth fighting for. But none of them knew that just beyond the fence, 2 officers were already scanning Jack's shelter. Again, and this time, they weren't alone. The storm came just as expected. Winds slammed against the colony walls like angry fists. Dust and broken ice danced in the air, making it hard to see even a few meters ahead, the perfect cover. Jack pulled the hood over his head and looked at the small bundle in Sarai's arms. Lena clung tightly to her mother, her face hidden beneath thick fabric. She didn't cry, didn't make a sound. She was too smart for her age, too used to danger. That silence hurt Jack more than screaming ever could. They slipped out the back door just after the security shift changed. Jack had timed it perfectly there. Would be a 15-minute gap before patrols passed through the southern quarter. The tunnel entrance was 2 blocks away, hidden behind an old scrapyard. Each step through the icy street felt heavier than the last. They moved fast, shadows in the storm. Jack led the way, his boots crunching over frozen ground. Sarai followed close behind, clutching her daughter. The wind howled around them like it wanted to tear them apart. Suddenly, red lights flashed through the fog. Jack pushed Sirai into a side alley and dropped. Flat against the wall, a patrol drone buzzed low overhead, scanning the street with a long white beam. Its camera lens paused for a heartbeat, then moved on. Jack waited until it was gone before motioning forward again. They reached the scrap yard just as the wind picked up even more. Metal sheets banged and clanged around them, masking their footsteps. Jack kicked aside a loose grate and revealed the tunnel opening. It was narrow and dark, but dry and hidden. Inside, he said, holding the cover open. Sarai climbed down first, helping Lena lower in. Then Jack followed, pulling the grate back into place from below. They were in, but they weren't safe yet. The tunnel smelled of rust and oil. Old lights flickered along the ceiling, but most had gone out years ago. Jack used a small handheld lamp to guide the way. They walked in silence, boots echoing faintly on the metal floor. Lena coughed once, and Sarai wrapped her closer. Her eyes filled with worry. "She's burning," she said softly. "Her fever's back." Jack stopped walking, turned around, and felt the child's forehead. It was too warm. He didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. "She can't keep walking long," Sarai whispered. Jack looked ahead, only half a kilometer to the access hatch. But even that distance could become forever if they were found. Then, a sharp metallic thud echoed behind them. Jack turned, lamp shaking in his hand. Voices, distant but growing. He couldn't make out the words, but they were human, armed, and closing in. "Go," Jack hissed. "Run." They didn't argue. Sirai clutched Lena tight and started running down the tunnel, her boots hitting hard with each step. Jack stayed behind for a few seconds, tossing an old fuel can across a side path to make a loud diversion. It worked. The footsteps split. Chasing the sound, Jack sprinted to catch up, heart pounding. He reached the hatch just as Sarai was lifting Lena up toward the exit. He climbed the last rung and shoved the hatch open. Light and snow blasting them from above, they crawled out onto the icy plain beyond the colony wall, breath smoking in. The air behind them, the hatch slammed shut, but not before a voice shouted out, "They're escaping." Jack grabbed Sarai's arm and ran. No time to think, no time to rest. In the distance, the silhouette of a supply truck appeared. An old smuggler rig Jack had paid to leave unlocked and gassed up. They ran toward it as flashes of red light flickered behind them. A warning shot fired, then another. Jack picked up Lena without asking and shoved her inside the truck. Sirai climbed in next, her hands shaking. Jack jumped into the front seat, started the engine, and slammed the pedal down. The truck roared to life, skidding over frozen ground as blaster fires zipped past. The back tires, they didn't stop. They didn't look back. Inside the cabin, Lena coughed softly and laid her head on Jack's chest. Sirai reached over and held her daughter's hand for the first time in days. She looked at Jack with something like hope and through the broken window. The colony of Varric 7 vanished behind them, swallowed by the storm. The smuggler's truck sped across the frozen plains, tires barely gripping the ice-covered road. The storm outside was growing worse, howling like a beast with no face. Inside the truck, Jack's hands were tight on the wheel, his eyes never leaving the blurry horizon. Every few seconds, he glanced into the back seat where Sarai held Lena close. The little girl's skin was hot, and her small body shook with fever. "She's getting worse," Sarai whispered, her voice cracking. Jack nodded, already pushing the engine harder than it was built for. The safe outpost was still 30 minutes away, hidden beyond the ridge. But they were running out of time, not just because of the patrols, but because of the child, the heater inside. The truck had stopped working, the controls frozen in place. Jack took off his jacket and handed it to Sarai. She wrapped it around Lena, tears slipping down her cheek. Not from the cold, but from helplessness. Then, without warning, The truck jolted hard. A blaster bolt hit the side mirror, shattering it into pieces. Jack swerved. Barely avoiding a sharp dip in the ground, he looked into the rear view. 2 patrol skimmers were closing in fast. Lights glowing through the snow. "Hold on," he shouted. Turning sharply off the main track, the truck bounced over uneven ground. Throwing everyone inside sideways, Sirai cried out, shielding Lena with her body. Jack gritted his teeth, pushing the vehicle to its limit. The terrain was brutal, sharp rocks, hidden patches of black ice, and deep snow. But it was their only chance. The skimmers followed. But one of them lost control and slammed into a jagged outcrop. The other kept chasing, now alone but faster. Suddenly, the engine sputtered. Jack hit the panel hard, trying to force it to keep going. The truck made it halfway up a frozen slope before the wheels lost grip. They were stuck. Jack jumped out without thinking, his boots sliding on the ice. "Take her," he said, opening the door and pulling Sirai and Lena out. He pointed at a narrow path between 2 ridges. "The outpost is just beyond those rocks," he said. "Go. I'll hold them off." Sirai grabbed his arm, eyes wide. "No, come with us." Jack looked down at Lena, her eyes half open, her breathing weak. He shook his head slowly. "If they catch all of us, it ends here." Before she could argue, he turned and ran toward the broken truck. Sirai hesitated, holding her daughter close. Then forced herself to move. She disappeared into the white storm. Each step a struggle. Through the snow, Jack climbed back into the cab. Heart pounding like thunder, he ripped the fuel line loose and spilled it across the ground. Then he lit a flare and waited. The skimmer appeared moments later, stopping just behind the truck. 2 officers jumped out. Weapons raised. "Stop right there," one of them shouted. Jack raised his hands slowly, his breath coming out in clouds. Then he smiled. "You're too late," he said. He dropped the flare. And fire erupted across the fuel-soaked ground. Flames roared, forcing the officers back as the truck exploded in a ball of heat and smoke. The blast blinded the sensors, scattering snow and fire across the ridge. Jack used the chaos to run, his legs burning with every step. He followed the trail Sirai had taken, hoping, praying that they had made it. The cold bit deep into his skin, but he didn't stop. Not until he saw the metal gate carved into the side of the ridge, slowly closing. A figure stood inside. Waving him forward, Jack stumbled through the gate just before it shut, collapsing onto the floor. Hands grabbed him, lifting him up, checking for wounds. He blinked through the fog in his eyes and saw Sirai, crouched beside Lena, who lay wrapped in blankets. Pale but alive, she looked at Jack, her voice shaking. "You came back," Jack nodded, coughing from the smoke. "Of course I did," he said. "She needs us both." And for the first time since the chase began, the sound of silence felt safe. The outpost was hidden deep inside the frozen ridge, protected by old tech, thick stone, and people who asked no questions. It was not large, not bright, not even fully warm, but it was safe. And for people like Sirai and her daughter, that meant everything. Jack lay in a recovery cot, bandaged and bruised, his muscles aching from the cold and the run. He woke slowly, blinking at the soft orange lights above. The first thing he saw was Sirai, sitting beside him, her face tired but full of life. Lena was curled up against her side, finally sleeping without fever. Jack tried to sit up, groaned, then laughed weakly. "Still alive," he said, his voice rough. Sirai smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did something foolish," she said. "But thank you," he nodded. Then looked around the room. Bare walls, patched, pipes, humming generators. Not a home, not yet. But not a prison either. Later that day, the outpost leader came to see him. An older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She studied Jack for a long time before speaking. "You brought them here," she said, not asking, but knowing. Jack nodded, waiting for judgment. Instead, she placed a new ID chip on the table. "You're one of us now, if you want to be," she said. "No records. No laws, just people who protect their own." Jack picked up the chip, turning it in his hand. A new name, a clean start. He looked at Sarai, then at Lena, who was now drawing shapes in the dust with her finger. She looked up and smiled at him. It wasn't a small smile, or a shy one. It was full and bright. Like sunlight cutting through the storm, he felt something rise in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what to call it, but it was real. The next weeks passed quietly. Jack helped fix broken heaters, repaired the old power grid, and taught some of the children how to patch solar panels. Sarai cooked with strange alien spices, turning even basic food into something warm and rich. Lena began to laugh, chasing other kids around the hallways, her hair bouncing with each step. They were healing. One night, as a soft snow fell outside, Jack sat near the fire pit with Sarai beside him. Lena climbed into his lap and rested her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, and she whispered something in his ear. "Papa." He didn't speak. He couldn't, not with the way his throat tightened and his heart beat so hard it hurt. Sarai placed her hand on his, gentle and steady. He looked at her and didn't need to say a word. The cold world outside still existed, with its patrols and rules and walls. But here, in this little outpost beyond the maps, something new had taken root. Not just survival, but family. Jack never planned for this. He never expected a stolen ration, a collapsing thief, or a child who would change everything. But that was the strange beauty of it. Sometimes what begins with fear ends with love, and in the silence of the snowy night, a human, an alien mother, and her daughter sat by the fire, together, safe, home.